Hey guys, we're back with another table talk group from people from within the community. And today our topic is, what do you do when your business isn't making money? And so let's do some quick intros. Deb, let's point to you. Tell us what you do and how you
Sure.
do it.
Yep, thanks, Gerald. I am a sales coach, the author of Sell Like
Yes.
Jesus, Seven Characteristics of Christ for Ethical Sales. And I am passionate about helping small business owners learn to sell in a way that is love-based instead of fear-based.
No. That's good because I'll tell you, people that don't come from sales backgrounds, and even people with sales backgrounds, but especially like entrepreneurs that don't come from sales backgrounds, so many of them don't like sales. So they think they have this preconceived notion of what it's not. And so what a great book. Bob, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Right, yeah. I'm in between seasons, as you mentioned. I've had several career segments, starting out in engineering and ending up in a small university on staff, and learned along the way that, yeah, there's a lot of people who are stymied by the fact of they have a dream. In the university, there were people that I wanted to see get into university, but didn't have a mechanism to get there. And so to put these principles together that you folks have already developed, to help people kind of get an on-ramp into how to make money on your own and how do you combine faith with that. Yeah.
Yeah, the path of the entrepreneur, I believe, is the path to the new American dream. With gig economy, there's so many people from, you think about the freelancers to people starting businesses. There's over 500,000 new startups every single month. And the failure rate is 90%. And it's a slow death causing a lot of damage over 5 years. So one of the things that we have to do is get really good at navigating when the landscape changes. And I don't care how much experience you have. I've been doing this for 36 years, and still there's something happens. It's a shift of landscape when your revenue goes flat, starts declining. We always joke and we say, it's no revenue, slow revenue, whatever you want to call it, but it's just not happening. And so the first thing I do when that happens, and it does, every business I've ever been into, whether it's at the beginning when we're launching and trying to figure things out, or midway through something happens and it just stalls out, is I look first to see what the Word of God says. And I look there first to get some comfort. And there's two scriptures. Deuteronomy 31:6, it says, "Be strong and courageous, do not be afraid or tremble." And it talks about the Lord your God is with you; He will not fail or abandon you. That always it's so comforting. Okay, even though it doesn't look good right now, God's still with me. And then the second one I like is Proverbs 16:3, and it says, "Commit your works to the Lord, submit and trust to them, and your plans will succeed."
Mm-hmm.
Now, guess what the top 3 reasons are for going out of business? I'll just say them. They run out of money, they run out of cash. 2, they have bad product market fit, which just means that the market is not accepting what you're selling the way you're selling it. You could have a great idea, but it's the market's rejecting what you're doing the way you're doing it. And then the third is you don't have a valid or a relevant customer acquisition system. And so I want to introduce this topic and talk about it a little bit, TDR. And this has been our foundation in the turnaround practice, in turning around companies, and also the foundation of our accelerator here at CanaGlobal. And it stands for Think, Do, Results. We all have a way of thinking, good or bad. It produces a way of doing, good or bad, and that produces results, good or bad. And just think about the golfer whose ball does not go where he or she wants it to go. So the results speak for themselves. But what I found is that a lot of people don't want to change their thinking. We've always done it this way. They're kind of vested in something that doesn't work. You look at a golfer with a bad game and, it's like, geez, it's obvious something's wrong, or if you're a farmer and the crops aren't coming up. What's changing? There's always shifts of technology and then shifts of buyer journey. That's the changing landscape, and that's why something stops working. And so in all of our lives, we have to be willing to change our thinking. What is the most difficult part of that? We all struggle in this area when we're used to thinking a certain way, and then something comes along, we have to shift our thinking. And it would be like the person, Deb, that has this way of thinking about sales.
Yeah.
And this is just, as far as they're concerned, sales is bad.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I hear the phrase "sales is a necessary evil."
Oh, that's good. How horrible!
It's awful.
Yeah. So what is the in your lifespan as an entrepreneur, as a business person, you've probably had to shift your thinking many times. What is the difficulty in doing this? Or when you're working with teams, when you're working with sales managers and CEOs and teams, they have a way of doing things. We've always done it this way, Deb. And it doesn't matter that it's not working, but pride and ego. So what have you run into when you're dealing with your clients or just yourself?
Pride and ego. You said the two biggest stumbling blocks. What really has to happen is things have to be bad enough. The pain to stay where you are has to be greater than the pain to change.
Oh, that's good.
Change always brings pain. It brings discomfort. It's the unfamiliar. It's the, gee, if I do change, what's the guarantee that I'm going to get something better? So there's a lot of resistance to change. So I find that people really are not going to change until they hit a wall and they realize what I've been doing is not working and I need to do something else.
That is good. Bob, so you're an engineer by background, and I would imagine in innovation, there's a lot of people that, we've always done it this way, and the innovators are changing that. What is your experience with people kind of rejecting change?
Right. Well, it's interesting. The corporation that I was with the longest time, about 15 years, I started in a division of a consumer product. It had been on the market for decades and all the cost reduction had been done. There was very little profit margin, and the company was known for its innovation in glass, especially glass, and always had something coming up. So I got to the point, I was early in my career, and I needed to change it. I can't call myself an engineer much longer if I stay with this really stagnant division. And fortunately, they offered me a position in what then was the leading thing. It was the very beginning of fiber optics generation.
Okay.
And so it was a decade of change after change. So I was in this group of innovators, but what I think one of the things they did to reduce the risk, as you mentioned, or to handle that sense of risk, they had an ongoing business, and that thing went exponentially over a decade. And what they did, though, was to have the stable business and then try something new alongside it without interfering with the existing, right?
Right.
And then much later, my last career segment was in a university, and I was super, super frustrated because I was the only one that I knew of with a hint of innovation of the structure of the university. So here I was in this system with just incredible people, but the system couldn't adapt.
Right.
And my frustration was seeing kids like my own kids are growing and they're through university now, but I thought, whoa, man, if their peers had had an opportunity to be here. And so I was constantly working on that question of and it's really your question, Gerald, at the beginning, run out of cash. Well, an 18-year-old doesn't have a whole lot of cash, or maybe their family has run out of cash sufficiently to pay whatever the number is for 4 years, right?
Right. Yeah, it's the thing that causes, if you've had a business and it's been operating, and I'm talking about like revenue right now and sales, but it's all the same principles with change. And, we're seeing a big shift in corporate America to lean and what that looks like, and in product development and old ways versus new ways. But in terms of marketing and sales, the big shift has always been there's shifts of technology which allow new things to happen, and then there's shifts of buyer journey. We call that the Amazon effect. So because Amazon is really one of the major players who have trained us to think this way. And so if you're in B2B sales, let's say, and you've had it's been a relationship sale. And so usually the customer's coming to the business development rep to become aware of some new thing, to be influenced, to be educated. Well, now that whole thing's happening online, and 80% of the whole buyer decision is happening online in a digital ecosystem. And so a lot of companies that are B2B that have been very, very successful, all of a sudden they started experiencing slow and declining revenue because, and it's kind of like I had a banker one time tell me, we're in the relationship business, and he was telling me about how, this one-on-one thing was so important. And I remember thinking, and I kind of, I should have kept my mouth shut, but it just came out, And I says, I don't know if you get this or not, but we don't want a relationship with you. If you're a business, that season's gone. It's kind of like with Amazon. My relationship is really with their system. I want to go find a product. They have a good system. They'll match 4 or 5 competing products together. They tell me all kinds of information. And then there's like the delivery. So there's certain times, there's a book I want to read, but I want to read it this weekend. And it's Saturday, and I'm looking for who can deliver it to my house today. And, hey, Deb, that's how I got your book. Your book came really quick. When we first talked about it, I thought, I'm going to read that thing. And I don't remember if it was that day or the next day, but it was in my hands right away. So this biggest shift, understanding there's always shifts in technology. Think about the taxi business and Uber.
Right.
Uber became possible because of technology shifts. And then the way buyer journey, none of us really wanted to ride in taxis. There just weren't any other choices. They came up with a new solution. And that's what's happened really across the world with this shift. So what do we do about it? I want to talk about 4 revenue pillars that you have to have in place. And for me, this has always been a checklist that I always come back to. They're like spinning plates. If you try to spin a bunch of plates at the same time, it seems like one of them's always falling. So this is what I always come back to. I could have easily made these 5 or 6, but there's 4 main categories. And I just want to start out with the first one. And it's really to take time and decide what you want out of life. So it's a 5-year work-life destination. And this is the time to, and we've talked about this, to imagine what you want out of a life. If you don't do this, you'll end up being a slave to your company. And what you'll find is when you're a slave to your company, you'll find it doesn't pay you well. The company, the business has to be your slave. And that's the shift. So you have to decide what I want. Now, this is one of the hardest things for people to do, is to reset their perception of what's possible, because most people love the word realistic, and if they haven't done it, their sense of perception. So what is when you guys have done this in your lives, or if you're in it right now, what's the struggle with resetting, really going after what you want? Deb, or whoever?
Yeah, so I could approach that a number of ways, like head trash, that I need to be doing things to meet other people's expectations, not my own. And when I got over that, what's challenging about it is I don't know the future, and things, as we have seen in the last couple of years, things can change. External forces can change things that you could never have anticipated. So I experienced that when I lost my husband eight
Right.
years ago.
Right.
So, we get thrown these life circumstance loops. So, where my mind goes to, gee, if I plan too far in advance, I might be making God laugh,
Hmm.
right? According to the scripture. Yet, there's validity in really being clear about what it is that I want. And I would say today I'm more clear about that than ever. And having that clarity then really does become a guiding, it becomes the guide rails for what I say yes to and what I say no to.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I want to know what the choices are. If I go to a restaurant and they say, can I take your order? What I want to know is, well, what are my choices? So what I do is I look to the scriptures first and I say, well, what are my choices? Because I don't want to, if we can't have the desires of our heart, then I won't go after the desires of our heart. But
Right.
then I go to the scriptures and it says we can have the desires of the heart. And then I go, well, how big? And then I go to Ephesians 3:20 and it says beyond your wildest dreams. So it's really interesting because a lot of times in the accelerator and business turnarounds, people always struggle with perception and they have all kinds of reasons why they don't want to do this.
Hmm.
I hear there's code language I hear all the time. One of them is, well, I don't need a lot of money. Okay. And I usually respond with something a bit sarcastic. And I say, well, it's not all about you. You know, that's the most selfish thinking because when you're going after a God planted dream and building a purpose driven company, it's not about your comfort, it's about God's purpose. And so one of the things is, I've always had to ask God, well, how many people do you want me not to help? And the number comes out really big of what he wants me to help, and that just costs money. What I found is that people come up with all kinds of excuses to justify their thinking so that they don't have to plan. And so one of the greatest studies is Nehemiah and his planning. The idea of rebuilding the wall was ridiculous. Ridiculous. This guy was a cupbearer. He was a nobody. And the idea of just it was impossible. So what I've learned is inside of me is a God planted dream. And what I have to do is move all my expectations up. One of the things a lot of people are going to be surprised when they get to heaven is how wonderful everything's going to be. And, they're going to find, God didn't just do the survival thing. It was abundant. So money for selfish people, money's about them. For generous people, money's how you bless others. It's just like it's water. Would you only want water for you, or would you want water to help other people? And this is just wrong teaching. So, Bob, I don't. You're just starting in this process, new season. What's the biggest challenge you face with like thinking out of what most people would say realistic?
Yeah, I've been blessed or cursed. I'm not sure which, with being able to see a big picture. I shouldn't say the big picture, but a big picture. But really to take that and to implement it and start small. One of the ventures I was involved with some years ago was I could see what it could be in a very, very expansive view.
Yeah.
But I wasn't so capable at that time of starting with what was in my hand with the beginning and grow and chart out a path to grow to that. So in fact, I had something very small in my hand and did start that. But and pull together a small team of people to do that.
Yeah.
But to scale that, I didn't have the resources or I didn't have the insight on how to do that.
Right.
So back to your
you didn't have the know-how.
Right.
Because what you'll find is that your destination is just a choice. When David went against Goliath, that was not realistic. He could have thought smaller. He could have said, well, let me go, start with somebody smaller. When you look all throughout history, when God's involved, when there's a supernatural involved, see, when God created us, he already knows what he's going to do with you. And what he's trying to do is renew our thinking and get us to think different. So
Yeah.
this is the first thing. This is a struggle. We're not going to solve that today in this, because this takes weeks when I'm dealing with somebody and when people are in the accelerator. This is a huge challenge because it's a reset of their thinking. The second thing now, and they think if I don't know how to do it, then it's just too big. Well, what you'll find with the top 5% of society is that they're not afraid of this. They dream they dream huge, but they plan and prepare. And this is a secret. They plan and prepare even bigger. When you're dreaming, we don't have to know how it's going to happen. We just have to say, this is what I'm after. And I challenge people just to think in some practical areas. Okay, do you have retirement? Okay, well, is that such a big ask to have retirement? Do you have a year of expenses put back? Do you have, if you've got kids and you want to pay for their college educations, if you want to leave something to your kids' kids? These are all biblical concepts. This isn't too big. These are just very practical things we have. But just because we don't know how, and this is what I've learned, is I can have, now I don't want to go after everything, because there's some things, a lot of things I say no to. But I have the freedom. And there's a vetting process for this too. I want to jump into the second thing. So the first thing is what you want, and know what you. This is called design success. If you don't design it for yourself, then somebody will design it for you. Somebody else will say, "Well, let me reset your expectations about." That's what socialism does. You're thinking too big. Let me reset your expectations of what you want out of life. The second thing is to really have a strong vetting process to build your business model and your brand. Most people who are running into trouble have a plan. It's just not a good one. And it's just like most golfers that have a lousy game. They have a swing. It's just not good. So the question is, what do you have to go through to build a solid plan? And so if you look at like Shark Tank, notice how they kind of pick apart people's plans. We have to have a team of people that we could trust. If you're by yourself, you got to be able to do this with yourself. And you have to have a system for vetting your strategies, your methods, your tools, and your tactics. And one of the things, I'm going to share my screen really quick, and I want to bring up Lean Canvas, just so everybody can get a look at it. You know what? It's not coming up, so I'm not going to bother with it. But there's a tool called Lean Canvas. It's 9 questions about your business. And this is what we use in venture capital. It's what we do in startup accelerators. It's what we do in turnarounds. And they're 9 tough questions about your business. And they really focus on problem, solution, and segment, who you're going after, the fish you're trying to catch, and the channels where they're hanging out. So what's the problem that your future buyers are willing to pay you to solve? Not just what's a problem that's out there. It has to be something that people are willing to pay you to solve. And what's the solution look like? Now these are just 4 of the 9 questions. But in Lean Canvas, it's not just answering these questions. It's really a methodology for peeling back the layers. And what we're trying to do when we're going through Lean Canvas is we're trying to get rid of the part that's not going to work pre-launch. Because if we have to figure this out post-launch, it's usually very painful. Now, what I found through the process of going, and it can be the most irritating process you ever go through, because you answer the 9 questions and then somebody says, they challenge each answer, well, why? And then you come up with a different, and they go, well, why? And you go 5 why. This is like the process. And if the business model doesn't produce enough revenue to meet your personal goals, we kick it out. Because why? I can tell you this, it's just as much work to build a company that does 100,000 as it is one that does 10 million. They're just totally different paths. And so, I'm all for starting small because you have to start at the beginning. But if you start at the beginning of the wrong path, you're going to end up at the wrong destination.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's why picking destination is so important. It's kind of like, if you decide in your personal life that to own a house and to be out of debt and just some very practical things, that working at Taco Bell is not going to do it. Okay, if you decide that,
Mhm.
then you're going to have to say, well, I'm going to have to get a career where I could have that lifestyle. Now, the person that's thinking that doesn't know how it's when I started the coding camp industry, that's what it was. We took people with low paying jobs, we retrained them for high paying jobs. It was just for them to be debt free, to have some things in life. They just needed more money and they wanted to do better things for their family. I used to hear, husbands say, you know, my wife works so hard. It'd be nice instead of just passing by the restaurant to stop and eat there. And we can't do that right now. Now that's not too big. That's just really practical things. So really having a system. So Deb, how do you deal with all kinds of people? A lot of people say they have plans, but based on the results, it's a bad plan because it's not working.
Right. Yep.
And not that everything has to work instantly, but what is in your business when you're starting out and when you've been evolving,
Mhm.
how do you know whether you have a good plan or not?
It's by evaluating what I have done and what results I got. So you have to understand, I've been at this for a very long time.
Right?
So, thinking back to the very beginning, I followed a dream that God gave me.
Right.
He told me to start a sales coaching consulting business in 2008. And we all know what happened
Yeah, you're
in
right in the recession.
2009, right? And it's total lunacy, but it's the way of the kingdom. So if he was directing me to it, I knew he was going to guide me to the success. So I went by faith, and then I used the structure that I knew how to teach other people to do. I used it myself to put the business plan in place, to list my activities that I needed to do to generate leads, the activities I needed to do to generate sales, and then I walked out that plan.
So what do you do? We talk about two different seasons, and so you see this in business all the time. The thing that got you there really keeps you there. So there's shifts of technology and buyer journey. So let's say you have. So I see this with CEOs all the time. Revenue's down, and then they go, we're going to go back to the basics. We're going to look at how we've made money in the past. Okay, we're going to go to the old wineskin.
Hmm.
And because that's what's always worked for us. Well, the problem is it doesn't work anymore, and because
So
something changed.
yeah, absolutely. So what we have to do is manage that piece of change because, and I'll give you an example from my own world.
Right,
I love doing in-person small group interactive training.
right,
Okay. I can't do that anymore. So
right.
I have two choices. Find another way to do what I know works,
Yes.
or or stop doing it because
Yeah,
I
that's great.
reject, right? Those are my choices. I can reject the technology or I can embrace the technology and learn how to make it work for me. But the core activity that worked before still works now, but it has to look different.
That's good. So what you're talking about are strategies and methods. And so, for instance, if let's say at one time I was a huge buyer in radio and television, and at an earlier time in my life, direct mail. I was a
Right?
king of direct mail.
Yep.
So that is a strategy and a method around buyer journey. Now, what happens is we build an apparatus around buyer journey. Well, what's happened, I remember when we shifted from radio and TV to digital. And what happened was the way people wanted to interact with us was online instead of through toll-free numbers and all these different things. And we didn't like the idea that we had done all this work on this apparatus, and the fish now went down a different path. And I didn't want to, I mean, we had dashboards and all, I mean, very sophisticated. I didn't want to have to change it. But you know, what's true is, and I think you nailed it, the strategy and the methodology, that part stays the same, but you had to figure out, well, how would we do this with new tools and tactics? Now,
Yes.
what does change is buyer journey, the way people want to buy. Because there was a time when nobody in their would ever buy a home without walking in it.
Mm-hmm.
That happens where I live in Arizona. It's the market's so hot right now that people are buying homes sight unseen because you have to if you want it. If you wait, if there's the house you want, if you wait a day or two, it's gone. So buyer journey. So, you know, that's a big thing. Cars are definitely like that. Furniture, all kinds of different things. Bob, what do you think about this whole idea of not resorting back to old tools and tactics and try to make old tools and tactics work and move into the future? What's the difficulty with this thinking?
Well, I think you touched on a lot of it. And just as you're asking the question, I realize I've been through a number of those things.
Right.
In fiber optics being one of them, went from copper cable to a piece of glass, for example, right?
Right.
With much more capacity. Or missions, I was involved in international missions for 10 or 12 years. And when I joined it, our organization had a massive infrastructure of technology, and it's similar to what you're describing, right?
No.
And now it's done over internet for almost zero cost, out of pocket. So yeah, just as you're saying that, I guess just to harken back to what I referred to a few minutes ago, in the educational field, I have a real passion for that because I've seen, I've seen the effect in my own family and in others. And I've seen the effect of people who don't go a path that's correct for them. And I'm not saying that a 4-year degree is right for everybody, of course, but whatever path is correct. And so, but that whole field is changing rapidly, and where it isn't changing, I mean, just probably people have heard the numbers, you know, a very large percentage, significant percentage of universities are projected to fail over the next 10 years.
Yep.
And as I left the university I was in, I said, now, Mr. President, I got half an hour with the president before I retired from that position. I said, I don't want to come back in 10 years time and this campus is a assisted living campus, you know, it's turned into a retirement facility. But that's a very, very real possibility for many universities. So in massive structures, comparatively, I mean, that's super difficult. There's so much inertia. Maybe the answer to your question is inertia.
You know, there is in software engineering, when the way the coding industry, you know, got started was we had mainframers.
Yep.
Going over to object-oriented development, and the mainframers, there was, you know, their way of thinking, their way of doing was so different than this new way, and their whole life had been based on this. And so we had, at the time, we were one of 2 companies in the country training software developers for this move from mainframe to object-oriented programming. And there was a great difficulty with those people making the transition. And the CEO of Honeywell, which was then Allied Signal, came to us. We trained all their people, and they said, listen, these people are not moving quick enough. What would happen if you trained a new breed? And that's how we came up with the coding boot camp. You know what they didn't have? They didn't have to undo all this baggage. Right. So it's kind of like, there's a guy I know that's 24 years old. He's a digital whiz in building digital ecosystems. He says, Gerald, I didn't have to rethink or relearn. I never had all that bad stuff. You know, it was good back when it was happening, but I didn't have to unload any of that. So, you know, think about the four things that we got to do is we have to set a destination. We have to decide what we want. The struggle is really understanding what our choices are and not trying to defend. What I find is that people defend to justify their victimhood. That's usually what happens instead of being a victor. And so what I love about when you're going after a God-planted dream, if you're a purpose-driven company, then you have to start thinking God size. So you have to start thinking, throughout history, God is, he stays with, he doesn't change. He stays with his strategy and methods, but some of his tools and tactics change over time. I mean, you see that all the time if you compare Old Testament to New Testament. So you have to have a way, a methodology for building and vetting. What I mean by vetting is everybody thinks their model's good until it doesn't work. What's that famous saying with Mike Tyson? Everybody has a plan until they get like punched square in the face or something like that. And that's what really happens. And what I find is even when people have horrible results, they still defend them. And that's pride and that's ego. That's what that is. Just picture a farmer for 10 years who can't get a crop. And he's refusing or she's refusing to learn new things because maybe there's changes in the soil or something else. The third, so it's decide where you want to go. One, really make sure you have a vetting process, because what I have experienced with this is every time I get forced to come back to lean canvas and also a process for building brand, I'm peeling back layers of the onion. And when I hit the gold, we call it cracking the code. God shows me something that I could have done from day one, and he reveals something to me. Every company I've ever built, every turnaround I've ever turned around, it's through this process, and we found this one thing that puts us to the front of the line. So in staffing, that was my first business. I was just doing what everybody else was doing, but struggling. The thing he showed me was, one, what he designed originally for me, it was different than what I was designing. And then he showed me it was really a customer acquisition strategy, marketing and sales. Once I grasped, and what I had to do is what, like Deb said, I had to get to a place where I was so miserable. I was in so much pain because it took me, in my first business, I was young and dumb. It took me a year to get there, a year. And you know how long the fix took? A month. When we implemented the fix, which I didn't know, it was something God put in my head that wasn't there before. But what he taught me was for every business after that, I went to God for this. And I still do.
That's so
because
good.
this idea that God doesn't know marketing and sales is really arrogant. It's really, really arrogant. He knows everything. The third thing is we have to develop a robust digital ecosystem. And so this is all around buyer journey. So once you know what you want and you build yourself a model that gets you there, but you've really vetted your model. And these are all scriptural things. Write the vision so you can run with it. Only a fool builds something, tries to build something without understanding the cost. One of the great things with Nehemiah was his planning and preparation. And he did the whole thing under fire. So you're always under battle. Nehemiah I think is a great, great study for leadership and for innovation, going against the impossible. And he demolished the word realistic. He demolished it. And you know what? Many of those people were mad because they got used to living with no wall. Mm-hmm. And this idea that there was going to be a wall up. I mean, think about it. When the wall was demolished, you could just hop over it and get to the other side. When the wall's up, now there's a system for getting in and out. A lot of people figure out a way, even though that was kind of like poverty, they learned to embrace just being a victim and surviving. Third thing is developing a digital ecosystem. Here's the thing. 80% of buyer journey, whether we like it or not, is happening online. So how somebody would become aware of you, how they would understand what you do, how they'd see what you do as a solution, how they would begin to respect what you're saying, how they develop trust. Those first things all happen online. And these are like a checklist that people go through. And so what we have to do is our websites have to be world class. And then we have to understand what a digital content strategy looks like. There's four kinds. There's shared, there's paid, there's owned, and there's earned. And we have to know the difference. And we have to know how to, when we're executing these, how to have the right mix of brand message versus brand offer. And we have to know every time we're putting content out there, is this for the person that's just becoming aware? Is this for the person that was aware, but now I'm helping them understand what I do? Is this, so this is really like tactical. It requires a strategy. When you are emailing, okay, I'm going to send X number of different types of emails. What's the job of each one? So this is something that like, okay, let me see your plan. And it's very hard to do. And what most people have is an outdated plan, a very outdated plan with this. Now, this is, this is the how-to is just a matter of being willing to learn how. If you want to know how, you have to be willing to learn how. So, Deb, you've been doing this for a long time. What is the biggest transformation you've had to make from old ways to new ways of digital?
Oh my goodness. I'm right in the middle of this of transforming my way of thinking about the whole digital reality.
Right.
Because as I said, I've been an in-person, shake hands, go to networking meetings physically.
Right.
So figuring out how to translate the results of that into the digital marketing world and reverse engineering. So I know the result I want to get. Now I have to look at what are the tools and what kind of back office software do I need? What can I automate? What still needs the personal touch? So I've been learning how it works, what tools are available. I've implemented, I'm not very well, but I'm implementing. I learned something
But
last
you're learning. You are learning right now.
I learned last year that perfect is the enemy of done, and I'm erring on the side of done, and then I make adjustments, right?
Yeah.
Because I will sit back to make it perfect and pristine and professional, and that doesn't work anymore. And
No, you know what this is like in the software business. It's called ship it.
Ship it 8% ready, and let the market tell you 20%.
Microsoft never ever launched a finished product. We used to get all the little disk and all that. Now that happens in the cloud. But this is one of the, you have to decide, you have to figure out at what point is it ready to ship, and it doesn't have to be perfect. The main thing here, though, is understanding the way fish swim and where they're at. So that's buyer journey, because you could have your strategy, you could have all these different things, tools and tactics, but you're in the wrong channel and you will not get a bite. So this is, look at the fastest growing segment in startups are boomers or the tail end of the Xers. So the fastest growing, the most successful are people, I'm not going to guess your ages, but I'm 59. When we shifted from a physical location, from an event-driven company where our community was, we developed a community because people were coming to our facility. And we had this our whole digital game was just getting them to events, okay? But all the community building happened in person. When we decided, now our challenge with that is we only had a 5-mile reach. So we're in Los Angeles, one of the biggest cities in the world, but we only had a 5-mile reach because anything over 5 miles was over an hour.
It takes an hour to go anywhere in LA.
It's an hour. So we had to when we made a commitment to take everything that we do online, Okay. What we had to do is still respect buyer journey, but it's going to happen differently. So for instance, what we're doing right now, this used to happen in a meetup, or used to happen in our war room, where we get a bunch of people in a group, discuss a topic. It would, and we do this very same thing. But you know what's different? I think about reach. You know, last week on this call, we had Belgium, Ecuador. When I think of just regular calls, yesterday I had Netherlands.
Yeah.
None of us would be talking right now if we weren't in digital. And so this is really understanding this apparatus. And I would say, Bob, this is, from where you're at, it's just being open to taking what you know, translating that into understanding buyer journey and digital ecosystem. Because there is something that Deb say that I want to go back to. If let's just take the sales process that's in person, okay? The sales process that you take when you're like guiding a future a customer into that all those different things that happen, that doesn't go away. In fact, if you don't understand this, most marketing people don't understand this, because the way companies have been set is marketing's one group and sales is a different group, right? And there's a wall between them. The magic happens is when you understand both sides really well and you create a service level agreement between both, because these days it goes back and forth, but it's happening in the digital. But once you understand what that looks like face to face, now the challenge is you go, okay, it's not how can we get close to that, how can we even make it better? How can we make it better? And when you can do that, and what I have found is that, I was thinking about the Bible app that hundreds of millions of people use. And I was fortunate to speak at a conference, and Craig Rochelle, the founder, the innovator, which they read, when he first launched that, people were like, well, there's nothing like ever going to replace the good old, this guy has so much reach now, what they're doing with technology, and they understood buyer journey. Now, what's crazy is I love my paper Bible. That's all marked up. But now in the morning, I got my paper Bible open. For quick things, I have my iPad, and I'm going back. It's just like in the old days, I used to have, I would have maybe different versions of it open, translations of it. But buyer journey, technology, really understanding digital. So you're going to, Bob, you're going to have to learn all kinds of new stuff. Tell me about your, what things you fear about, hey, it's like, can I really learn? Can I learn to shoot videos? Can I learn to edit videos? Can I build websites? Can I do all these different things myself when it's maybe something, and maybe you have done this, but because I don't really know, but what is your fear, or you can pick a different word of that approach?
Right. Yeah, I think the good question. And I've done a tiny amount of it. I think I know what needs to be done, but I think for me, it's the fear of learning out loud, perhaps, and when it's face to face, going back to our earlier conversation, when we're in a small group, we know we have feedback, right?
Right.
And on the digital world, even like we're doing now, there isn't the same kind of feedback, at least.
Yeah.
Right. The cues that we would normally have. So it's a different way of interacting.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I learned with technology education in the early days, you had to come to classrooms. It was all instructor led. And then when technology shifted, and so did buyer journey, all of a sudden people thought, this mix of on demand. There's certain parts of what we were teaching that should be on demand, so that we could go back, we can take notes, we can watch it. There's all these things that you couldn't do in instructor-led. And then there was a value between online live. And so the value of having this interaction, and then also with the community experiences. And then also things like testing and different ideas, mock environments. So, in the early days of technology training, everything was done instructor led. We used to build our training centers with maybe 30 classrooms. But we only had a certain reach. What changed with Buyer Journey is people started going, you know what, if I'm going to take this training, I'm going to do it from the comfort of my desktop, or I'm going to take the day and do it from home, and I'm going to take this training on my big screen, and I can stop it. I have, or I can do it on mobile, or I could just listen to the audio. So there's all these things that you couldn't do. But to really get to to a place of maturity, we had to understand Buyer Journey. And a lot of people, I think like some of the top innovators in the world, like Apple, have figured out what people want before the people even know they want it. And that's the beauty behind innovation. So, you think about it, and if you've watched Simon Sinek's The Why video that so many people watch, that's right, what he's talking about. So here's, the first three things that we've covered, and we're done here, is you got to know what you want out of life. You've got to have a way of vetting. You have to understand digital. This is the biggest thing. And then the last one, which we're not going to really get into because you can't do it in this kind of call, but you have to put all these things together, and you have to build a digital or a customer acquisition system. And you just got to realize that 80% of that is going to happen online. And, if you don't know how, it's out there. You just have to be willing to learn how. It's that simple. I'm 59. The stuff I could do today that I couldn't do last year, much of the stuff I'm doing today, just because I decided I like to master something and then pay other people to do it. And so I know how to shoot multi-camera with nobody behind the cameras. I know how to edit. I know how to use the Adobe Suite. I know how to use all kinds of different things that I used to always be reliant on other people. And it's just because I was willing to learn how. It's really that simple. And I remember when I first got into radio and TV, there was a time when I didn't know anything about it, but I just had to be willing to learn how. So there's always these shifts, and we have to go, and they're seasons. And I think they take us faith to faith, and they're wineskin to wineskin. And one of the things that we have to learn is when we get into a new season is understand the assignment and be equipped. And that's what we have to do. So any final words from you, Deb, on this, and Bob? And we have like 1 minute left.
So I'll just say the recurring theme is we have to be lifelong learners.
Oh, that's good.
Always be willing to learn something new.
Yep. Bob?
I like your last sentence. Understand our assignment and be equipped. I mean, that hits home to me.
All right, guys. It's been wonderful to have you on this call. And for those that are watching this, I hope you got something out of it. I know I did. See you guys next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.